Wow, power and progress. I was thinking the first time I met Balaji was like 10 years ago at A16Z, and he was wearing Bermuda shorts and flip-flops, so obviously moving to Singapore has some effect.
就是他讲很快，照常讲。
It's the last time that but the first time that Balaji has been wearing a jacket, I haven't, the other way around. So I don't think we have a particularly narrow remit here, power and technology and progress and how everything is going to change. I thought, and sort of part of the theme, I think, of what Balaji was saying earlier, and in a sense of what I was saying earlier as well, is how different AI is, but also to think about how many times we've had everything change before, like how the internet changed everything and plenty of other technologies before that. And I thought something interesting to talk about to begin with would be that the internet was going to be wonderful and amazing and great, and it was going to end human suffering and connect everybody in the world. And it turned out in the 90s that it connected everybody, and that meant you could be the only gay person in the village and you'd meet other gay people. And it turned out it also meant you could be the only Nazi in the village and meet other Nazis. And like the sort of, there was a degree to which the internet changed everything, but also a degree to which sort of humanity reverted to the mean. And we discovered that social media wasn't completely 100% good. And so on. And I just think it's kind of interesting to think about that and to think about all the ways that maybe AI will again revert to the mean, to the mean, and bring out all of humanity's worst instincts as well as best instincts.
It's funny, I would say that I actually think, the way I think about it is the internet increases variance. And what it means is more upside and more downside in everything. And the mechanics of that is actually not so much reverting to the mean, it's actually removing in every situation the mediator, the moderator, the middleman, right? The moderate. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. A middleman is taking a tax on things, maybe you don't want that. Sometimes, the moderator is, a choke point centralizing, sometimes they're keeping the peace. But what it means is that all the kind of choke points on society gone, and every node can connect to every other node. So all these extreme nodes, extremely good and extremely bad, pop out there. And so you're summing an equation that has these hugely positive terms, like using AI to solve, protein folding, like what Denise, Hasidas has done, and just amazing technological breakthroughs. And then you have obviously really horrible things. And it's very hard to sum an equation that has these very positive and negative things. But I think ballpark, it's not so much regressing to the mean, it's actually the opposite. It's like diverging in both directions from it.
Yeah, it's one of the ways I used to sort of talk to regulators about the internet was to say, like, you're seeing all of humanity being expressed and channeled and amplified in new ways. There was a sort of a story from the UK when there was lots of violence around football matches, and Margaret Thatcher said to the head of the Football Association, "Why are your fans causing all these problems?" And he said, "They're your voters." So kind of what we're seeing here is the expression of humanity in kind of new and different ways. One of the sort of things that maybe expresses that is, I was thinking of some people may know my grandfather was an influential science fiction writer in the 50s, which means science fiction writers have heard of him, but I don't get any money. And quite a lot of his stories that you see, first of all, the sort of classic stories, it's rocket ships and societies on different planets, but it's all white men flying rocket ships. And you fly the rocket ship, but you have paper star charts and slide rules. And you have to queue up to buy a paper ticket in order to fly to another planet. And it's kind of, whenever you kind of go back and look at predictions of how every new technology is going to get used, it's always, well, it's going to be our own society and the issues that we have now, but with this new thing. And what actually happens is that we get changes in different places, in different axes, in different directions. And I'm wondering how much are we kind of not predicting what the internet's going to be, or what AI is going to be. We just, well, I'll have all the same stuff but with AI, and how much is actually going to be different from that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, AI turbocharges what the internet already does. It puts it on steroids. And maybe one of the issues I find interesting, especially coming from the world of politics, is we ask it questions, and what do we do when we don't like the answers? And most of the time now, we're going to get answers we don't like, as in, you must change, or, the Waymo robotaxi comes and picks you up to take you to work. but informs you that we're going to the hospital because it's already concluded that you're about to have a heart attack and you need medical attention right now. And what's your acceptance rate? Or like, do you argue with it? Do you say, that's ridiculous, I'm perfectly fine? Or are you grateful that you're being forewarned? I think this is one of the huge issues, is it's going to inform us that many of the decisions we make are on very unsound basis. That's the nature of the human condition. And so if we don't like it, we may find it's more efficient, it's more profitable, but it's challenging our notion of free will and decision making. And I think that's a big struggle that we're already seeing. The question is, why do you want a better answer? Is it to make life better? Or is it because you're trying to make the performance of the company or the country improve for this quarter to get the votes or to get the share price up? If it's the latter, then we're going to be in a constant difficult situation. So one of the things I'm always focused on is, we ask, what is it to be an AI? We're asking this all the time now. But we're not asking so much, what is the nature of being human? And what can we do to protect and preserve our humanity as we build these systems that help us have better quality decision making? But the definition of better is yet unaddressed.
So there are all these fantasies from, if you kind of go back to the sort of 50s and 60s, that you'll be able to build like a government center that has a database, and then you'll just have the right answers to everything.
Yeah.
And it turned out that you have a lot more data that actually the underlying differences of opinion of like, should you have more employment rights, or should you have faster economic growth, generally don't have right answers. They have questions of emphasis or opinion or priority where different people can disagree. And you don't have one answer, you have questions about what you might want. I don't think software doesn't necessarily change that, but it kind of shifts how we discuss those things, doesn't it?
100%. So again, as someone who spent many years in financial markets, when people ask me, should I buy fill in the blank, crypto, equities, bonds, right? What should I buy? As if there's a universal answer to that. But then my question to you is, well, do you already have crypto? A lot or a little? Do you already have equities? A lot or a little? In other words, the risk is our own. It's individual. But the system doesn't like that answer because that's not scalable. If I'm a financial institution, I want to give everybody in this room the same answer, and I want to sell you all the same product at the same time. But the reality is each one of us have different risk appetites, different risk profiles. And I think one of the good things that an artificial intelligence-led world will do is facilitate each of us expressing our individual preferences without being funneled into these universal answers applied as if we're all exactly the same, because we're not. Everyone has their unique aspects of who they are as a human. So, you mentioned in the first question, you asked about, this technology of the internet. We thought it was going to be great. It's not always so great. I think all technologies are the same. You could use the automobile to safely transport your family, or you could use it to wipe out a family. Everything, it cuts both ways. So it's all about how we use it. And that's why for me, I keep saying, we are the technology. All these things we're talking about, artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, these are like prosthetics that are expanding our capacity to execute and do things. But we are inventing them. We are creating this stuff. So you are the technology.
So linking maybe both of those.
I just have one thought on your earlier point on why you had rockets with queues. I think it's relatively easy to extrapolate out each individual technology, like rays of light going out, like rockets will get better, phones will get better, and so on and so forth. But it's hard to model the interaction effects. And for example, video games getting better, social networks getting better, but these produce the data and these produce the GPUs that trained AI, right? Another interaction effect that I think about a lot is drones getting better, and I know we'll argue about this, but crypto getting better. And the thing is that most backends are hacked, Like the Pentagon is hacked over and over again, most government systems are hacked. Blockchains are not hacked. That means that the control plane for the drones will be on chain. Like that's the only genuinely secure backend, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, those are not hacked, whereas government systems are. So just like people thought video games were not that important, social media was not that important, but they provided the data and the compute for something that became all important with AI. These like little flying drone cameras. Now people understand drones are important. Crypto, people understand, I think, that that's important, but the interaction effect of those, I think, is going to be very material in the medium term.
There's a fascinating Rand Corporation study from the 60s that tried to do kind of long-term forecasting, and they did these surveys of dozens of experts and produced kind of bell curves of when people thought things would happen. And it's everything from like machine translation to automatic doctors. But I talked earlier about AI being a word like technology. Automatic is another one. I no one talks about automatic anymore because it just happened. We don't get into an elevator and say, I'm going to use an automatic elevator now. So when would you have automatic driving? When would you have automatic translation, automatic doctors, automatic filing of your taxes? And the funny thing about this is, like, there's the obvious point that they thought we'd have colonies on Mars by now, and we don't. But that everything is in the wrong order. And so you look at the sequence now, and you think, well, they thought that we would have, like, the NSA could listen to all of our phone conversations by 2050. But we would have colonies on Mars now, and we would have had machine translation working perfectly in 1980. And when you kind of look at the sequencing, what it is they thought each of those would be point solutions, and didn't understand that first you'd have general purpose computing, and then you'd have software on top, and everyone would have a computer, and then this would happen, and then that would happen. So the sequencing is like no one will get a newspaper faxed to their home until like the year 2050. But everyone would have perfect machine translation in 1980 and not realize like it's the other way around. You have to have that first, and then you have this. I was just picking up on sort of both of your two previous answers. One of the things that I spend a lot of time talking about to kind of marketers and retailers and people in advertising is that before the internet, you had very limited amount of media, very limited amount of retail, very limited amount of product. And so, like, only so many people could buy the back page of Vogue, only so many people could do a nationwide TV ad, there was only so much inventory in most retailers, even a department store. So there were these kind of constraints of what you could buy and what you could know about. And with the internet, you basically have infinite media and infinite product, and you have no idea what to buy. And Amazon has whatever it is, 500 million SKUs. And then there's infinite advertising on Instagram, or Google, or YouTube, whatever it is. And so there's one question, which is exactly kind of Balaji's point about, like, you have this infinite variance. Like, instead of you having this kind of narrow concentration of what you buy, now that explodes, and there are all these different nodes and different tribes and different interest groups or interest roles or whatever you want to call it. And the same thing kind of in politics. There used to be this kind of constraint on most countries. You kind of focused in on kind of two bell curves on the chart. There's kind of a bell curve of sort of center left, and there's a bell curve center right. And the internet has kind of exploded all of those, and now it's much more like proportional representation. And you have these kind of many more different kind of political tribes. All those coalitions kind of broke apart. One of the things I was sort of wondering about generative AI, particularly as I look at retailing and brands, is, you know, what happens if I can kind of just wave my phone at my living room and say, right, what holiday should I buy? Like, you can see my home. Okay, so what kind of hotel would I like in Rome? Or maybe I should go on safari. Like, how much does the ability of the machine to see everything and build patterns across everything, again, change how we think about what we might like, change how mass culture might work, change how our political preferences might work, because we get this kind of new layer of understanding and aggregation. Sorry, I'm waving my hands a lot, but it's kind of a very hand-wavy sort of question. Suddenly we have this new thing that isn't Google or Instagram, that sort of understands everything, and that might be politics, it might be what we might want to buy, it might be how we choose a bank.
Well, the way I think about it is like the garden of intelligent things. So your fridge is also your nutritionist, and your oven is also your cook. And that will just order ingredients for you, tell you how to prepare it, and it might be specialized or domain locked to the area where it's, you know, kind of got data or what have you. Your robot dog can talk to you. It's interesting, you know, have you ever been to Dubai's Museum of the Future?
No.
No? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Have you been there? Yeah. Have you seen the, one of the things they did there that I didn't realize how good it was, is they took robots and clad them so that they have they have a drone, but they've got like a pufferfish thing around it. And that really changes your perception of the object. It's kind of like the drone by itself is like a skeleton, but with this flesh, so to speak, around it, it actually kind of feels like an animal of some kind, right? And it really does, you should go check it out. And they've got a few different things that are like this. And I think that that's almost, it's like putting a user interface on top of a website. It just totally changes your perception of what it feels like. And so you'll have all these kinds of animals that'll talk to you and do things. And I think almost like I don't know, one of these magical novels or whatever. So.
Actually, this is really interesting to me because my first venture into the robotics world was helping to co-found a robotics company that was making drones, which is about 10 years ago. And it's to your question of pace of adoption. And what I learned from that experience was, at the time, everybody's like, what's a drone? Like, really, only 10 years ago, people didn't know what a drone was. And they didn't know, why would I need one? And we were trying to sell industrial drones, gathering industrial data for construction sites or farming. And even though you could make the case as to how it would save them money, it would be better safety for their personnel and the whole list, they couldn't do it until their peers started to do it. It made me realize human beings are such social creatures. And so to your point, why do we have this weird adoption pace? It's not consistent with what is possible. And the answer is because human beings have one constraint, which is lack of imagination. And that's combined with the need to be accepted. And so people get afraid. It's exactly what Ed Snowden was just talking about. I just tweeted out, in fact, an original quote that I picked up on this same subject, which is Frank Zappa, the musician. And he said, progress only happens when you deviate from the mean. And so technology by nature can't progress very quickly because it's only the people who are deviating from the mean that are running with it. And then the average, it's really about socializing the concept. It's not, does it work? Or do I need it? Or will it actually make my profits go up? You would think those would be compelling enough, but they're not. Are my peers using it?
I mean, the thing is, at the beginning of World War I, if I recall, they were still doing horse and cavalry charges, and that actually had to get cut short into by machine guns before they abandoned that. And I think just even the fact that we have human militaries now is actually partly a function of a lot of military budgets are based around, this is the piece of equipment I'm using an aircraft carrier, I'm an aircraft carrier guy, I'm a tank guy, I'm a this guy. It's kind of like, and even the movies are still, Top Gun Infinity or whatever number it's on, nothing against Tom Cruise. It's still talking about manned flight and whatnot, whereas everything is going to go unmanned. It's all going to be drones, it's all going to be, self-driving, it's all going to be, humanoids, and that's going to be fighting robot wars. I mean, that's completely obvious. But obviously the cost curve has to get there for some of these things. Some of them is already there, like Ukraine and Russia are already just fighting drone wars. Israel's fighting a drone war right now with Iran. But the current, the issue is that current institutions don't have any incentive to self-disrupt. That's why new entrants generally tend to come in.
In fact, in my talk about this afternoon, after this, I'm going to talk a bit about space and why we're spending so much money going into space. But people have it in their heads, this is about human beings, it's about astronauts. And why? Because NASA gets their allocations from Congress based on heroes. They have to create these heroes. But the fact is, the future of space is about self-assembling, self-replicating robotics that are either fully autonomous, certainly AI-led, remotely controlled at times. And that's what will do the build-out, not just for the lunar surface or in orbit, but beyond. But that doesn't resonate with Congress. Allocating money to robots doesn't resonate to heroic astronauts. So it's a huge mindset.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to be in Singapore and talking about drones, because for Americans, the iconic moment is Pearl Harbor. But if you go back and look at all the debate about aircraft in the previous 20 years, no one would have really had a problem with the idea that you could sink a battleship at anchor in a harbor. the whole intellectual question was, can you sink a capital ship at sea when it's doing 30 knots and can turn and can shoot back? And it turned out actually to be really hard to do that. The Japanese managed it, half a day sailing from here when they sank 2 British capital ships, which is the first time anybody had sunk a capital ship at sea. The irony is that the Japanese strategy for the war was not aircraft and aircraft carriers. They thought it was going to end up as a big battle between American and Japanese battleships, which in the end never happened. There was no such battle. But the interesting thing is the debate before, in the previous 20 years, and there was all this argument about, are we going to be able to do this? And it wasn't clear that you would. There were lots of people who thought you wouldn't. The Japanese weren't clear that you were going to be able to do this. And then there was this kind of great catalytic moment when they discovered that this was possible, and all the world's navies kind of suddenly had to reorient around this new technology. And in classic technology cliche, this was disruptive, because you go from a battleship that fires a broadside of shells 20 miles to an aircraft that can carry one shell more or less 200 or 300 miles.
Well, yeah, I mean, the new entrants, for example, India landed an unmanned probe on the dark side of the moon and did it very cheaply because it didn't have enough money, so it had to do it cheaply, and so it wasn't obsessed with a manned mission as it was moving forward. And like for example, the Houthis in the Red Sea are at like 1/1000th the cost structure. Politico's talked about a $2 million U.S. missile versus $2,000 drone. So. They are, or even the aircraft carrier example, the capital ships you just mentioned, Hegseth, as the defense secretary, has mentioned that Chinese hypersonics can basically sink all U.S. aircraft carriers, and at least one U.S. aircraft carrier evidently had to retreat, or at least had to go back for extended maintenance. That's the story, at least they're saying. Maybe it's just maintenance, maybe it's actually more than that, after the engagement in the Red Sea. So in many ways, like, some of these things are already kind of obsolete, but until it's like actually sunk, then it's not like mark to market in some sense. I don't know, maybe.
There's always sort of the whole history of military technology is that it always gets more expensive. And the fact that each generation is more expensive itself tends to be disruptive and narrows in who can do it. And then someone comes in with something cheaper that sabotages the whole system.
Yeah, you had this thing about like something reaches perfection just as it's obsolete. What was that thing? Something like that.
Yeah, I think I read something about this years ago. It's like, you get the perfect propeller-powered aircraft just as jets arrive.
Yeah.
You get the perfect battleships just as aircraft carriers arrive. And you get the kind of platonic ideal of a thing once it's become obsolete. Right?
But we're in a very interesting moment right now because something really profound has happened in the military defense space, which is, in the old days, if you spent a lot of money on defense equipment, that bought you security. But when I was in the White House on 9/11, we realized that $5 box cutters overwhelmed all of our defense capability, literally. And today, we're seeing these extremely inexpensive drones in a variety of different methodologies, the warheads on foreheads to all sorts of examples. So suddenly, all that huge money that you've spent on physical defense capability is got a huge question mark over it. And so it forces us to think creatively, and people are starting to realize that maybe the most valuable piece of defense equipment is a 3D printer. It's not a weapon system as you usually think. It's the capacity to create on the go. And that requires a total change for the people who think about defense. That's not how they're used to thinking.
There's a classic joke about LLMs that basically half of LLMs will be turning 3 bullet points into an email, and the other half will be turning an email into 3 bullet points. And now that seems to apply to drones, that half of it, basically, they're having our drones shooting down their drones.
Why would it be a 3D printer?
So, for example, one of the considerations right now is, can you build, if you have a conflict, can you build hospital facilities very quickly? 3D printing, icon type buildings. Another is drones. Can you 3D print a lot of drones really fast?
You can 3D print small drones. I think it's hard to 3D print buildings.
But we're heading in the drone. Well, I disagree. The Chinese are showing us that they can do hospitals in a week. Now, it may not last long, the quality may not be
Well, yeah,
great.
okay, well, so I guess the mechanics.
In a
sorry.
conflict
Sure.
environment where it's the equivalent of the tent in Vietnam, how fast can you pitch a medical tent? So suddenly you're looking at things that you didn't initially consider. And by the way, there's a long history of this in the defense space. I mean, we look at what was the most important innovation that allowed the creation of the largest empire in history, which is the Genghis Khan Empire. And the answer is metal stirrups. And you're like, wait, metal stirrups, why? Because all of a sudden you could put a human with armor on, and they didn't need to hold the horse because you could stand, which means you could shoot your bow and arrow forward or backward. Now you have speed. But if you ask someone in the military defense space, what's the innovation that will make the difference? Nobody would have guessed it's going to be metal stirrups. All of this requires creative thinking. I mean, I've spent some time over the last decade lecturing to the senior NATO generals and trying to bring this kind of thinking into their realm. But these are very focused organizations that don't make a lot of time for that. In fact, fundamentally what I think AI is going to require is we're already good at analytics, and now we're going to be amazing at analytics because AI augments us. And that means spending more time on your creative side. And that it's less good at, and we're really good at.
So shifting.
Can I make one point? So I think one way of thinking about this is in terms of digital borders. That's to say, I think we're going to eventually conceptualize, China's in some ways already there. In a sense, China and crypto take the internet seriously because they've got the Great Firewall and the blockchain respectively, which are like defensive structures on the internet in very different ways. But digital borders will be as important as physical borders because if you don't have digital borders, somebody can script a drone in your territory and blow something up. And so then that changes the debate over what nodes can connect to what other nodes. Like, is it pure internet-free speech? Is there some moderation? Who is a moderator? What kind of level of moderation is legitimate? And I think that like the entire concept of digital borders and having the cloud borders like airspace and land are actually, that's going to be important. And otherwise, and that kind of also relates to, it's not simply a weapon, but a person who's disaligned with your population, who's inside, is something which, that they're not a member of your social network, your community social network. And then they can just go and blow something up, for example, right? So I think people are going to have a reconfiguration of what they think of in terms of like nationality, in terms of their network membership, for example.
So picking that up, and there's an old framing in thinking about any new technology, that to begin with you force the new technology to fit what you already do. And then over time you change how you work in order to fit the new technology. You think about how that's worked with email or the web or e-commerce, or even go back and think about cars, for example. And I thought it was interesting, particularly given what you just said and some of the stuff you talked about in the past, that particularly with things like, if we think about when the internet got deployed, and then crypto, and now with machine learning, there's a sort of step one where you force it to fit your existing legal structures. And then there's a step one, Uber, and then there's a step two where you say, okay, maybe if this doesn't fit our existing legal structures, we change the legal structures. Or we take a step back and say, well, what is it that the law was trying to do? And maybe the underlying aim can still be accomplished with this new thing, but we change the law to fit it. And clearly we've seen that around crypto in the last year or two in the US, and we're having a whole wave of questions now around machine learning. And I'm kind of wondering how much we, again, how many laws there are that we're going to change, or how many places there are that the technology is going to change in order to fit the underlying aims of the laws.
I mean, I think, so when will the laws change, when will the tech change? I think, I mean, you know, the lessing thing of code is law, right? Like, I think you don't think of the state and the network as two different layers, where I do think the network moves faster and that things are de facto feasible digitally, and then the law is then adapted to shape. The network moves first and then the law comes second, especially because, for example, on social media with AI, you can literally write draft legislation, post it, and actually get it implemented. And so this is becoming the governance layer. Like, the actual parliament is social media, in a sense, right? It's not really Congress. Like, the debate is happening on social media, right? That's actually almost like the true voting system. The voting is happening every day.
So I do think in many ways in the West, it's network over state. I think in China, it's the opposite. It's state over network. They have like taken the opposite evolutionary branch, and they've just clamped down so hard that the network is within this firewall, all the apps are contained, all the CEOs are within a mile of, like Beijing and so on and so forth. So that's like the alternate scenario where the network is underneath the state versus the Western scenario.
Yeah, actually, I think crypto is super interesting right now because we have in the United States an administration that is completely reversed the traditional stance. It's not left or right, it's just this anti-establishment position, which is to introduce a Bitcoin reserve, to legalize crypto and tokenization. And I don't think people have really understood in the traditional political world what a revolution this is. Because what it really is, on one level, is creating pathways for bright people who get together to create value to not have to wait for Wall Street or Silicon Valley to bless them. They will be able to tap sources of capital bypassing them. But also this means the creation of an entrepreneurial class that's much larger than what we've ever had. And I'm very impressed with the work that you're doing actually with your network, creating this new generation of entrepreneurs. And as they do that, they will not be joining big corporations. And big corporations, this also is like such a radical change. If you create something on a smart contract, let's say, and you raise your capital by tokenizing it, then you're never going to issue equities. Well, if you never issue equities, and let's say that's where the new Apples and the new Teslas are coming from, what happens in the stock market? Answer, it's going to go away. And have we thought about, a lot of our power structures are based on there's equity and there's debt and it's regulated by the government. Now we're going to have something new.
So I agree with some of that. Here's the parts I agree with. I think you're going to go from basically the current U.S. financial system to an internet financial system. And the fact that stablecoins are now legal, and we have an on-chain dollar that maps to an on-chain dollar, will mean we have on-chain equities that map to off-chain equities. We have on-chain fund interests that map to off-chain fund interests. And basically every fiat paper-based form of anything in finance will be now put on-chain. Because once the currency part is on-chain, there's no reason the rest of it isn't. That means you get internet capital markets. So I don't think that equity goes away. I do think that it gets mixed with coins and tokens, and basically the new Wall Street is on-chain. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is, I do agree with you that this is the century of the individual or the institutional. In fact, just even the 9x16, the vertical format, it's just, maybe it's a coincidence,
这次我们同行的
but to
有一
film
个
on
男
that,
的
you're
感
filming
觉
an
是
individual, it's
埃
almost
及
like
吗
they're？ standing tall on the frame,
什么意思？
right? Whereas the
就是
traditional movie,
俊妍
16 by
跟
9,
我
is widescreen,
还
so
有
it's a
你还有
panorama,
另外一个人
traditional,
国
it's
新的
large,
国
or
新是
something
埃及
like
吗？
that. So that itself sort of symbolizes that transition from this very giant organization,
我
centralized
想说
century
没
of
看
the
过
20th
啊。
century, to this individual, lone kind of person,
原
or
本我
small
以为
group
是
of the
俊也没看
21st.
过，结果
Yeah,
日
there's
本
a
端
sort
的
of a forcing function you can see. I was in Rome a couple of weeks ago and got up very early to walk past the Trevi Fountain, and of course there were 300 would-be influencers all there, and they weren't auditioning or trying to get a meeting in LA. They were all effectively auditioning on TikTok or auditioning for the algorithm, or trying to find their audience, or trying to create something. And you can kind of make fun of it, but you also, this is media and pop culture become radically decentralized. And today, that's the TikTok algorithm, the Instagram algorithm, the YouTube algorithm. Each of those may be on chain, they may not, or probably some combination of both. But it is a sort of radical decentralization of the kind that we kind of go through. We've gone through kind of every 50 years or every 100 years. We sort of reset how all of those kind of cultural systems work. We've got sort of 5 minutes left on the clock. There's a kind of a classic quote I wanted to talk about from Robert Solow, who said that you can see the computer age everywhere but in the productivity statistics, which is always this sort of funny paradox that, like, here we are, most of us earning our living from glowing rectangles that didn't exist 30 years ago and doing jobs that didn't exist 30 years ago. And yet, an economist will say, well, this is all great, but I can't actually see it in the numbers.
So on that, I actually had a thread on this 5 years ago. So where's the internet in the productivity statistics? So by one measure, like within living memory, backspace didn't exist. Like people were writing on typewriters. Photocopiers didn't exist, right? So you couldn't backspace, you couldn't copy paste, let alone search, let alone pull all the links, all the citations for something, let alone use AI. The tooling that we have now versus something people had in like the 70s or the 60s is so insanely amazing that you should be writing a novel a week or whatever, in theory, right? Of course, you can now do it with AI slop, but like a good one, right? And because the sheer speed, the resources that are available are so much greater, and yet is that the case? And I have like 5 theses that are, some of them are there, some of them are not. One is there's a great divergence where some people are making use of all that stuff, and those are the indistractable few that can just lock in and hit keys faster, build a unicorn faster, right? And most people aren't like that, but some are, and so that's why you see these crazy growth rates for things. A second possibility is the great distraction. We've given all this productivity, but we've also, all the negative stuff, all these crazy distracting social media things or whatever. A third is there's been some dissipation where we have, because of those tools, we have bureaucratic forms that then arise to absorb the complexity, somewhat different than distractions. It's like, oh, you can write 20 pages? Okay, I want 20 pages of documentation, so the form expands to become more complex. And then, maybe the answer is actually that all the stuff we're writing online, maybe humans shouldn't have all these Notion documents and Word documents and so on. Maybe like it needs to be full stack robot for it to actually work. Maybe us generating all these documents and box folders and what have you is actually a waste of time because we still have to comprehend it to do something with it. Maybe you just want something to comprehend it and just act like this and close the loop. Because the email is sent so much faster than a postal mail, but our actions, maybe it's the human in the loop that slows the whole thing down, right? Then maybe you want that though. Maybe you want to slow the whole thing down. Maybe you want that deliberation or something. So, I don't know. I think it's some mix of these. Oh, one other thought is, it's also the great divergence, but the society level. Like there's certain things like shipbuilding or building houses that China's like 100 or 1,000x faster at, but not in a figure of speech way, but literally like 1,000x faster at. For example, they have 200x shipbuilding capacity of the US. And so maybe the answer is the productivity is there, it's just not being used in the West, and it's there in other places. So these are some possible explanations.
I had a joke on Twitter a few years ago that like young people won't believe this, but before Excel, investment bankers worked really long hours. And now thanks to Excel, the Goldman Sachs associate gets their work done at lunchtime on Friday and goes home. And of course that's not what happened. Or why is that not what happened? It used to be that you could do that analysis and it would take a week, so you wouldn't do it. And now you can do 50 different analyses and it will take you in the afternoon. So you demand 100 and they're there until 2 in the morning. Has the productivity of that associate gone up? Depends how you value that analysis. In the end, you might still take the same investment and you might still get the same return, but you have 5x more analysts before you made that decision. So maybe productivity's gone down. All of that, in a sense, is like people got very excited talking about the what was it, the paradox about coal? Maslow's, not the,
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where when the cost of something goes down, your usage goes up.
My mind's gone blank. It's all applied price elasticity. If you make analysis cheaper, if you make any of these tools cheaper, does that mean productivity goes up? Does it mean you just use the tool more?
I mean, the big thing is, what is productivity?
Kevin's paradox.
Is it measured in like dollars per hour? Well, I don't know. Maybe there's some fiat issue with devaluation that's measuring it. If it's measured in terms of just like widgets, like physical widgets produced, well, we've got a lot more of those things. So like in the ratio scale sense, we have a ton more phones, drones, all that kind of stuff that we did 20, 30 years ago. And so maybe we're looking in the wrong place in terms of numbers.
I think that's it, but personally as an economist, I think we're measuring it wrong. And it's this idea like the Federal Reserve has that when you buy an iPad, that because the price came down and the capability of the iPad went up, you got a productivity gain. But the fact that the person who bought the iPad doesn't know how to use any of that productivity, they're still using only 10% of what it's capable of, means we're just measuring it all wrong. And maybe one further thing is, what we do with all our productivity gains is not take advantage of them. We just keep working harder. And as we keep working harder, we're actually becoming less efficient because we're not taking advantage of what this has bought us, which is time, to do other things. And I do think this is a big issue with AI now. AI is going to free us up to not have to work so much. And then people are like, well, what the heck am I going to do if I'm not working? And I'm like, what about living? What about being human? What about spending time with your loved ones, painting, doing art? And they're like, well, that's not productive. But that's the most productive thing you can do as a human being. So I think this question of what constitutes productivity is now becoming a very profound human question.
Okay, I think that kind of call for emotion is a good place to end our analysis. I think that there's a red light flashing at us. So thank you very much.
That is a